Hi, and welcome back to another episode of the History of Fan Anime. I'm your host, William Chow, and in today's episode, we're going to talk about another really controversial issue. It is about the censorship of Japanese anime. And we're going to go talk about some of the recent articles and just how basically it's just a reoccurring problem, something that we've always had encountered with, and really had no problems with, except now obviously this is the newest rendition of it being repackaged and basically re-regurgitated back out again in a different form, to try to achieve the same results of the non-results that has happened in the past. All right. So before we begin, I want to remind everyone to go down below and click like and click subscribe. We know that any sort of comment that you can make will help the YouTube algorithm promote it and make it available to more people. All right. So anything that you do will be great. That's a little, I don't ask for much, but again, if you could at least do that, then it will definitely help the YouTube algorithm. Thank you. And for those who like to support me financially, I do also have the super thanks button down below, as well as the links for the PayPal and the Patreon. Now, I've been building a lot to the Patreon recently. I've now put a lot of resources available to you people, as well as a lot of the content that is for the subscribers that I cannot put on YouTube, because there's now a lot of topics that I'm now covering which are not allowed to be put on the YouTube, so all those things are now available to the members there. As well as I've also now put the my audiobooks available as in audio form and on video form as well. Those are also partially free to the Patreon members, so do check that out. Okay, and so for all the other new users that are on this channel, I've also compiled all the episodes of the History of Fan Anime into a large database sheet. And if you like to basically look at different episodes that are pertaining to certain topics, like maybe CDs or maybe art books or maybe the fan culture itself, like conventions and that kind of stuff, they're all put together in a book-like fashion and they're put into the spreadsheet. Again, the link is below, as well as other resources like the database sheets for the My Anime list of the 1980s, and of course the top 30 animes of the 1980s is also all available in spreadsheet form there. Link is below. Today's topic is based on some articles that have shown up recently that have been a bit of concern for especially a lot of these newer anime fans. What the heck's going on? We're getting all this great anime, and then all of a sudden someone wants to step in and start censoring it. And again, when we were doing anime and doing things with fan subbing and that kind of stuff, one of the things that we really wanted to focus on is the almost the purity, almost the conciseness, the accuracy of things like translations and that kind of stuff. The true shades of meaning that is coming from Japanese anime and reflections of their culture and how it can be different and whatnot. Okay, we really embraced that when we did the fan subs and that kind of stuff. We did not like it when the commercial companies neutered it or tried to take all the stuff that they thought maybe was offensive about it, or controversial issues or whatever. They took that all out of the anime or tried to rename it, or even so much so as change the story, make up a weird ass story about this and call that a proper translation, right? And again, we hated that kind of stuff, and that's what anime fans really push back on. And so anyway, here we got some government agencies trying to do the same thing that they've always been trying to do, trying to shut down our anime and trying to deneuter it under the name of womanism. Okay. Anyway, so I'm going to come up with some examples of things that have come up, and I'll do some reaction to them. Okay, and add my bit based on the history that I know of. Because this isn't the first time it happened, right? So this is a reoccurring issue, and so I'm just going to bring my past back into it to give you an illustration of how this has been brought up in the past. Okay, so without further delay, let's get into some of these articles.
Because some of the best stuff now comes from Japan, because they can tell the stories they want to tell without, for the most part, people breathing down their neck on what it can and can't have and what's right, what's wrong. They can pretty much just create what they want. We get some of the best stories from Japan, in my opinion. At least now we do. It used to be a little bit more even, but honestly, like, some of the best shit is anime now, in my opinion. And you might not share it, but there's great stories that come from that country now. And we don't really get that much from Hollywood because everything is either political or tries to be inoffensive. Like Venom 3 pretty much tried to not offend anybody. And we're living in wild times. So here's his statement. This is what he put out, and I showed you his post a little bit ago. This is just his post translated. On October 29th, the Committee of the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women published its concluding observations on Japan's ninth periodic report. This was prepared following a face-to-face review of the ninth report on the implementation of the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, which was held on October 17th. Now, here is the statement that Yamada gave today on social media. In this final opinion, concerns were expressed that pornography, video games, manga, and other animated products may incite violence against women and girls based on gender or sexual orientation. And I hate how naughty videos, basically hentai is, I think, probably what they're talking about here, are being mixed in with video games and manga. Also, Japan's, unless things have changed, rules on that stuff are pretty strict. At least from what I remember, unless it's changed, there's already rules and regulations on that stuff. It further recommended effectively implementing existing legal measures and monitoring programs to address the production and distribution of these things like video games and animation products that reinforce discriminatory gender stereotypes and reinforce violence against women and girls. However, the government has confirmed the content of the face-to-face screening, but no questions were asked about manga, anime, and games, despite not being checked during the face-to-face screening, and company expressed its concerns. The company expressed its concerns. The one-sided content denies the freedom of expression in manga, anime, and games and calls for them to be cornered through legal action and surveillance, which is extremely unjust. We will consider requesting that the sources and grounds be disclosed and also requesting a retraction if this is not possible. So that's his stance, and his stance is against censorship. In short, he's trying to say that Japan has done well to keep creative expression free so far, but the government hasn't fully decided if it will keep things as they are or introduce new limits based on outside advice. They haven't really seriously discussed it. So because they have not discussed it or talked about it, he doesn't know what the future is. But as of right now, they're doing a good job of letting people pretty much do whatever they want.
Okay, so what we have is a situation which is, we've had this before. I mean, this is the probably second, third, fourth edition of this fear mongering that we've had. I mean, back in the days, where soccer moms got all upset about, all these violent video games like Halo and Modern Warfare and Call of Duty. They're gonna affect our children's brains, and they're gonna start doing bad things, or all this Grand Theft Auto is so horrible. It's gonna cause immense crime rate and all this stuff. And the Gen Xers, like, we grew up fine, right? We're not we work hard, we get married, we have kids, all these franchises up to, are not up to Halo 5, and we're up to Grand Theft Auto 5, and obviously nothing seemed to have happened. But they always keep bringing it up and whatnot. And this is the same argument that we have with anime. And they say that, all the anime watching is gonna affect people's brains, and they're gonna go crazy and whatnot. But look, we've had this, the 3Gs and And this whole entire movement all in the same time we've had this, and we've had anime in our mainstream for over 40 years. And there's no evidence that anything has affected Gen X or millennials' minds. And as a matter of fact, if nothing else, we will find out that more women are getting into anime, and more women are producing and making manga and that kind of stuff. So, I think in all retrospect, I think it's empowering. It's giving them other options and other means to express their artistic ability and enjoy genres that they wouldn't have enjoyed otherwise. So I think there's evidence the other way around, especially if you look at the numbers. Anyway, you take a look at the difference between anime conventions in the 1990s against the Anime Expo, like right now, for example. The attendance is like obviously greatly increased. So I don't know what these UN people are talking about. We've had the same arguments against drugs, sex, and rock and roll, right? Oh yeah, you can't listen to heavy metal music because it's gonna be satanic, and you're gonna grow up living in a cult, and Ozzy Osbourne, he bit the head off of a bat, and that's gonna cause all these kids to go crazy and do all these weird things to animals and that kind of stuff. And did it happen? No. Did they are they trying to be a fearmonger and all that stuff? Yeah, of course, that's exactly what they're doing. But did Gen X grow up weird? No, of course not. They know the difference between reality and they have means and they can identify with what forms of different types of entertainment. Sure, they may not like it. Obviously, these country westerns listening and these sort of gospel people or whatever. Okay, they may not like how groups like Def Leppard and Black Sabbath and Deep Purple and all these guys came to popularity, just like how people didn't like how rap music sort of took over the late 90s into the 2000s sort of era of music and whatnot, and weren't agreeable with the themes and that kind of stuff about them. But again, it's all this fear mongering and need to regulate this and that has grown into just a really poor exercise of just not knowing where popular media has taken things, and to understand the people that consume it. There's just no need to babysit the industry, as it were. Sure, you can put regulations, you can put rules and that kind of stuff, but don't go around, trying to impress your ideals and morals onto other people when it just really isn't warranted. And I think that's what it all gets down to. It's just it's encroaching on the people's freedom of speech, just for that just so that you can push your narrative, whether or not it's a particular religion, a particular viewpoint, womanism, whatever it happens to be. Just keep that out of the entertainment.
Savvy put out a post on this too, and she pointed something out, which is true. There's really no evidence that says that anime and manga is going to hurt anybody. They just kind of, and even if there is some kind of study, it's a social science study, and social sciences have a massive replication problem. And what that means is they might do something in their lab at whatever company or school, but if some other school or company tries to replicate it, which means doing the same study, a lot of the times it fails, which is a problem, especially for something science-based. You should be able to replicate it wherever. As long as you have the instructions and what you're supposed to do, you should be able to make it happen. And that's a big problem for the social sciences, which does all of the research on anything talking about stereotypes or discrimination or prejudice, anything like that falls under a social science, and they're not very reliable.
Is that science is more than a body of knowledge. It's a way of thinking, a way of skeptically interrogating the universe with a fine understanding of human fallibility. If we are not able to ask skeptical questions, to interrogate those who tell us that something is true, to be skeptical of those in authority, then we're up for grabs for the next charlatan, political or religious, who comes ambling along. It's a thing that Jefferson laid great stress on. It wasn't enough, he said, to enshrine some rights in a constitution or a Bill of Rights. The people had to be educated, and they had to practice their skepticism and their education. Otherwise, we don't run the government. The government runs us. But the thing about science is, first of all, it's after the way the universe really is and not what makes us feel good. And a lot of the competing doctrines are after what feels good and not what's true.
There are millions of people who understand science does not prove religion, because religion is faith-based.
Let's look a little more deeply into that. What is faith? It is belief in the absence of evidence. Now, I don't propose to tell anybody what to believe, but for me, believing when there's no compelling evidence is a mistake. The idea is to withhold belief until there is compelling evidence. And if the universe does not comply with our predispositions, okay, then we have the wrenching obligation to accommodate to the way the universe really is. So,
okay, hope you enjoy that. And again, there are many sort of reactions to this, though, so I might have to put some more, make some more episodes in regard to this issue. And again, on the surface, it seems really, really tragic and really controversial of what the heck are they trying to do? I mean, trying to outsiders trying to inflict their values and their morals and their sort of views and their rules and regulations on a totally separate country with their own sort of thing. Because, I mean, the reason we call it Japanese anime is because it is from Japan. It is in Japanese, designed for Japanese people, right? They don't make Japanese anime, they don't animate it in Japan and then English dub it so that, it can be for the rest of the world. I mean, that's something that you maybe think maybe like Walt Disney would do, right? They'd make a movie that's appeasing to everyone in the world, and then they have to dub it in multiple languages and that kind of stuff to do that. Japan doesn't do that. It's you get a particular anime, it's in Japanese. They expect to sell most of the copies and that kind of stuff of it in Japan. Okay, all the merchandise and all that kind of stuff that they sell on the show is designed mostly in Japan. Sure, some company like Crunchyroll or whatever, may come along and say, hey, we want to, pay for the license to that so that we can, get it into English and put it onto Crunchyroll or whatever. Sure. I mean, that's them licensing it, but that's not Crunchyroll going in there and saying, no, we don't want to have any pictures of this or that, or, we don't want any, robots. We don't want any girls wearing anything shorter than this much, knee-high dresses. We don't want any this kind of stuff. It's not Crunchyroll doing that. It's just basically saying, okay, here's a bunch of Japanese animation. Okay, if we want to get some particular title or whatever, and it passes a bunch of checks or whatever, then Crunchyroll will go and license it, and then they'll do whatever they need to it. Okay, so that's sort of the proper way. I mean, if you got rules and regulations, you change your own rules for your country. Okay, don't start goofing off and trying to force and suggest that Japan should change their way, right? And that's sort of what's going on here. So, anyway, we got more episodes of this coming up. So again, if I have to break this up into more episodes, I will do that and make it. So again, make sure you go down below and remember to click like and subscribe, and we'll get into more episodes as we do. Okay, so Until next time, I will see you again.
other celestial objects, and then finally draw Voyager in the foreground. Each of these would be separate programs writing into the same frame buffer, and it would take a long time to render a frame, and then the frame would be photographed off the monitor. But before you could draw anything, you had to decide on the color palette. This had 1 byte per pixel, and that mapped into a palette list, so he was lucky the Jovian system didn't have a huge amount of color in it, so he could sort of stick with yellows, oranges, and reds, and of course different brightnesses and saturations. So now for the planets. Modern graphics hardware tries to convert everything to triangles because these primitives are very easy to optimize in hardware. But with the limited hardware available, it was actually better for him to represent planets as a proper sphere and just texture map those. Where did he get the texture maps then? Well, for Jupiter, the spacecraft was capturing images on the way in for months ahead, and so they were able to actually capture data on what Jupiter should look like, and then using the camera orientation, the spacecraft location, the planet, the perspective, they could unwrap that into a texture around the planet. But in that form, it still wasn't perfect. They needed to have an artist go in and clean it up and turn it into something they could use for the animations. But the moons were far smaller, and the data wouldn't be ready in time to ship the animation out to the media. So they got sci-fi artist Rick Sternbach to come up with designs for the various Galilean moons. Now, Rick Sternbach is a name that you may be familiar with if you're a Star Trek fan, because he worked on Star Trek Next Generation, and he very much helped define the look of the 24th century in Star Trek. So in March of 1979, Voyager 1 encounters Jupiter, and the public information movie that goes out with it shows these moons that have been, fabricated by Rick Sternbach. Now I have to apologise for the quality of this video because I can't find a good quality version of the original Voyager 1. Because most of the ones online are for Voyager 2. Voyager 2 got to Jupiter in July of 1979, and by then they had been able to take the images off the moons and create proper texture maps that could be used for the new Voyager 2 movie. And the easy way to spot that you're watching the Voyager 2 movie is to look at Io, because Voyager 1 flew past Jupiter and it discovered volcanoes on Io. So for the Voyager 2 movie, Jim added these particle effects to show something that looked like the volcanic plume coming off of Io. And while this is pretty primitive as particle systems go, Jim Blinn would actually invent particle systems for work on the Cosmos TV show. So for the third step of the process, Voyager would then be rendered using a set of programs called polys that would basically draw polygon models. The model itself was built using points derived from a set of blueprints for the spacecraft, but it wasn't just polygons that were supported. There was a surface of revolution primitive that was specifically for things like the radio antenna, and all those struts, they had an optimal way where you would specify the start and end point and a size, and it would calculate the correct on-screen sizes, thereby minimizing the amount of geometry. In some of the early versions, you could only have 100 polygons in the models and had to actually have separate models depending upon whether the spacecraft was seen in front or from behind. The next planet on the tour was Saturn, and of course it came with its own challenges, namely rings. And if you think about it, rings are kind of different from everything else because they can be in front of and behind the planet. So the rings end up getting split into two halves. First he rendered the distant half, and then they would render the planet, and then you would render the forward half of the rings. And on top of this, there was a whole lot of research he did into figuring out the light distribution, the scattering method, the fact that scattering of light coming through the rings behaved differently from light being scattered back from the rings, and then shadowing. So the rings could be shadowed by the planet, the rings could cast a shadow on the planet. Now, of course, the way these things were all rendered separately, so the rings had to know where the planet was to actually do the shadow calculations, and similarly, the routine that rendered the planet, it had to understand where the rings were so it could correctly perform the shadow generation. And also for the handful of frames when the camera is passing through the ring plane, he had another particle effect. But there was also a moon at Saturn that required invention of a new technique. Mimas, if you remember, has a huge crater, one that makes it look a lot like the Death Star. So now if you just do the simple thing and slap the texture onto a sphere, then it looks wrong. So it looks wrong for a number of reasons. First of all, as it rotates and the illumination source remains fixed, the shadows should change on these craters as they move across the face, but they don't. And it becomes very obvious when the big craters come around and the dark areas remain the same. This is basically just a texture painted onto the surface. Turns out that Jim Blinn actually invented a technique to deal with this. In his 1978 paper, Simulation of Wrinkled Surfaces, he proposes using something like a texture map which translates to surface height, and then by taking the difference between two neighbouring pixels, you can figure out the angle of that surface and then apply that to the illumination, and you have a normal map or a bump map that lets you illuminate a surface and make it look as if it has holes in it or wrinkles or some other structure that it doesn't actually have. You're not changing the geometry, you're just changing the way it reacts to light. Unfortunately, that crater on Mimas is just too big, so he had to go one step further. So again, starting with the real astronomical data, they tried to map it to this imaginary sphere, but then instead of just simply painting it onto the surface, he used this to generate geometry for the object. And so instead of just being a bump map, this became a displacement map, a long time before anyone was talking about displacement maps. And that allowed this rendering where the camera flies low over the surface of Mimas to that very large crater. Now, look, obviously the techniques used here are vastly different than what modern displacement maps used, and it's only a very tenuous link, but I still think that this is a big step forward in computer graphics. And look, I'm not an expert on this by any means, and I'm sure there's other obscure examples that can claim to be first, but nevertheless, this was an important animation to me, and obviously, as Voyagers went further into the solar system, we got new views, new techniques. Hey, we had the color blue in this. That was a big step up from Jupiter and Saturn, right? And you have to remember that JPL is near LA, so there were people from the film business that were seeing these animations and wanted to know how they were done. In fact, Gene Roddenberry apparently got a demo of how this stuff worked. Jim Blinn would work at ILM for a while. In fact, he lived in San Rafael, which is really close to me. And of course, ILM were responsible for the Wrath of Khan, the computer-generated sequence for the Genesis effect, that definitely would have taken a lot of hints from this. And it all comes back to these computer visualizations that were created for the press and the public so that they could understand what Voyager was doing in deep space. I'm Scott Manley. Fly safe.